Welcome back to Reimagine 2021. I am Yonah Hochhauser, and today I'm glad to be joined by Edan Yago, Chief Cheerleader for Sovryn. Edan, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Well, first, Edan, you want to tell our audience kind of who you are and how you got into the blockchain space?
Yeah, so I'm Edan Yago. I have been in the blockchain space for about 10 years now. I was studying, I did my PhD in neuroscience, had a focus on neural networks, was working on creating diagnostics with neural network systems, and as a result was reading about network science, like network papers. I came across this paper, which was like nothing else, which completely screwed up my life. It was the Satoshi white paper, and it just blew my mind because it combined, there's a really interesting thing about our digital lives, that they have become more and more alienating and less authentic. In that, you create this persona online, you create sort of a virtual life for yourself through Instagram pictures and Facebook posts, and then everything can be infinitely replicable, and so nobody owns anything online. And if you're in a game and you have like your car or your gun or whatever your assets are, they don't actually belong to you, they belong to the company that created the game. And so I think people have become more and more divorced from the context in which they live, because digital is so devoid of context. And what context is ownership. It's your ability to sort of own who you are, and who you are is much more than sort of like your own perception of yourself. It's sort of like the context in which you live. So your house is part of who you are, your education is part of who you are, etc. When we gave up ownership, when we gave up scarcity in the digital world, we gave up the ability to have authenticity for ourselves. And so when I read the Satoshi white paper now, and I realized that what Satoshi was creating was a digital commodity, a way to create scarcity and true ownership in the digital realm, I realized that this was going to be the biggest thing since the internet itself, and I had to be involved. And I think maybe maybe what I said was a bit abstract, but to boil it down to its simplest thing, what authenticity means is not fakeable. And the first not fakeable digital thing we ever had was Bitcoin.
Mm-hmm. But it's interesting because, your conclusion that you're drawing is that, people have turned to the online world and they've lost this idea of scarcity. They've lost this idea of authenticity. And you assume that people want that. Isn't the reason that people ran to the digital world is so that they can be someone they're not? If in the real world, they can't afford a luxury home or a Lamborghini, they could run to the digital world. And because there is no scarcity in the digital world, now I could live my dream. I could have that mansion. I could have that Lamborghini. Isn't this, aren't they running to the digital world for escapism, and therefore they don't want the scarcity there?
No, not at all. They're not trying to escape who they are. They're trying to become who they want to be. When, somebody, for example, goes through sort of like a parallel thing that we've been seeing culturally recently. If someone goes through a sex change operation, right, we don't say they're escaping who they are. We say they're becoming who they feel authentically they want to be. If now I use the example of games, right? But games are a pastime. When you reflect yourself in the online world in an inauthentic way, and people have always been inauthentic in all kinds of ways, right? It's sort of like this narcissism of getting likes, of getting clicks. You are divorcing yourself from who you are. But when you represent what you actually have, when you create an unforgeable identity for yourself, and if you think about what a Bitcoin address is, that is a part of an unforgeable identity. When you then invest in that, then you are being authentic, and you're becoming who you want to be. You're being sovereign about your own identity.
Mm-hmm. Well, you threw in the word sovereign. You're the chief cheerleader for Sovryn. What exactly are you cheering on? What is Sovryn?
So Sovryn is a little bit more concrete than all of this abstract philosophical stuff I just said.
Mm-hmm.
So sort of going back to Bitcoin created this ability for us to have our control over our own assets. It created a sovereign monetary system, right? So our existing monetary system is called the fiat monetary system, and fiat means by decree, right? The people in charge decree, we have $1 trillion more, and poof, there's $1 trillion more, right? So Bitcoin created a sovereign monetary layer where you can control your own funds and no one can control the monetary system itself. This is great, but it's kind of useless unless if you're in a situation where you can have this Bitcoin, but the minute you want to use it, you have to go and give it up. You give up your control by putting it into a centralized exchange or a centralized lending platform or any centralized financial service. And today, if you want to use your Bitcoin to trade, to borrow, to lend, to make even some kinds of payments, you basically have to go through the process of giving up control to a centralized provider, a centralized middleman. And so what Sovryn is it's extending the promise of Bitcoin, creating a decentralized financial layer for Bitcoin and for cryptocurrencies more generally, so that the power, the sovereignty that you get with your Bitcoin, with your other cryptocurrencies, is now, or rather I should say with your other crypto assets, is now extended into the financial and economic realm. And so what does the platform actually do? The platform allows for decentralized Bitcoin native lending, trading, leverage trading, and soon futures, and eventually basically all forms of financial activity.
Mm-hmm. So this is essentially DeFi being built upon the Bitcoin network. How is that actually working? Is it a layer 2? How exactly is this working?
That's right. Sovryn is a layer 2 system, which bridges between Bitcoin and Ethereum, and as other chains, if they ever become important, other chains as well. It's a merge mine side chain with Bitcoin, which means it's secured by the Bitcoin proof of work itself through the process of merge mining. And it also is tightly integrated with Ethereum. So it's basically like the Bitcoin shard for Ethereum. Mm-hmm. And it's EVM compatible, which means that you can build Solidity or EVM smart contracts on the system. And indeed, everything I have just described, right? The lending, the trading, the stable coins are all created via these Solidity smart contracts.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think if you were to go to, I don't know if most people, if you were to come to me and say, build, what is the ideal, let's say, what would the ideal blockchain look like? I would say something like, I want the smart contract abilities and interoperabilities and compatibilities of Ethereum, but I want it to have the security of Bitcoin, or the consensus backed by Bitcoin. And I guess with Bitcoin being the, let's say, native currency, although, obviously if it's going to be a true DeFi, it should be so able to support many sorts of tokens, but I would say Bitcoin should be that base native token. That kind of sounds like what's going on here. Is there really any downside to it? Is it able to scale? Are there people building on it? And if not, why not?
Yeah, so I think it does combine the best of both worlds. Bitcoin is the native currency. It's secured by Bitcoin proof of work, and it has a high degree of scalability by using roll-up technology. So right now, for example, transaction fees are about 1/100th of what they are on Ethereum, and we think that maybe by March or April they will be so cheap as too cheap to meter. And
Are those rollups? Are those ZK rollups or optimistic rollups? What kind of
So we're
rollups?
actually working on a combination of both. We are primarily working right now with what people call optimistic type rollup or fraud-proof rollup. But we've also been talking to primarily the Starkware team around integrating also zero-knowledge proofs, and they have advantages and disadvantages under different circumstances. So you might want to have a combination of them.
That's exactly right. There are pros and cons to both. Enabling functionality does fill in the blanks. Starkware, a great firm representing Israel, Eli Ben Tasson. So you guys have the scalability covered. You have the security covered. And you mentioned it's EVM compatible. So essentially it's a plug and play. Right now, are there currently dApps built upon this? Is this we're talking theoretical, or is this already active, running?
No,
and there's dApps that you can use.
You can go to sovryn.app right now, and you can start a trading, leverage trading, borrowing. You can take advantage of Bitcoin-backed stablecoins, yeah, so it works. It's live. It's currently somewhat limited because it's still being tested. So real funds are being used by real users, but through a process where the protocol has a whitelisting system, we kind of, as a community, limit the growth of the community right now just to make sure it's 100% safe. Again, we think that by around March that will come to an end. There are, we know, there's a growing community of developers building on the platform. So there's many things that I've heard that people are building, both for the platform and sort of around the platform, like wallets, better arbitrage bots, really interesting stuff that people are doing.
Now, one of the things that I've been on the lookout from the space, as we've seen the rise of DeFi and kind of this new idea, or relatively new idea in the space at least, of I both want to maintain my keys, maintain my exposure, maintain my ownership, while still making my crypto work for me. As in, back in the day, it used to be hodl. If you believed in a coin, if you believed in the system, you just hodl it. You hold it. You hold it because you don't want to lose it. You don't want to put it anywhere. You don't want to trade it. You believe it's going to grow in value, believe in its future. And so all you could do was hold it. And then with the growth of DeFi and DeFi options, I was both able to hold my coin while still actually have it work for me. I could let it out. I could put it out and give liquidity, all types of things. But the solution that was missing, at least in my mind, was doing that with Bitcoin. Because the only thing you could do is you could wrap your Bitcoin, but you were wrapping the only way to the main way of wrapping your Bitcoin seemingly were kind of to trust, kind of give up control of your Bitcoin. Even when you're wrapping them, you were trusting different protocols that were wrapping them to hold on to them securely and not mess it up. Is there a way here utilizing Sovryn that will both allow me to still maintain ownership of my Bitcoin while being able to use it in the DeFi space?
Yes. So Sovryn is designed to be completely permissionless, completely decentralized. The security assurances of the decentralization are not necessarily the same as Bitcoin. That's always something that if you're not holding Bitcoin on Bitcoin main chain, you need to take into account that there is going to be some kind of introduction of new risks that you are taking upon yourself. Of course, those new risks are far, so it really depends on the system. But for example, with Sovryn, they are not the same types of risks that you are taking when you're using a centralized service. There's vastly more transparency. There's no one in control. Everything is open source. And the ultimate backing of the security is Bitcoin proof of work. So when it comes to bridging Bitcoin, what we're doing is we're actually working towards a system where there can be multiple different ways that people can transfer their Bitcoin to Sovryn, all of which are decentralized, all of which are trustless, but they might have different security assumptions, which different people might prefer, or they might have slightly different decisions around trade-offs in terms of, for example, speed versus security. So part of being a decentralized system is that you don't get to decide how people bridge, but you can, as a community, set certain thresholds, certain principles that you adhere to, like trustlessness, decentralization, and censorship resistance.
You know, if we go back to ever since, let's say, the launch of Ethereum, you know, and that kind of, you know, kickstarted, you know, there's been tons of different of other layer one protocols that have come out, and similarly in the space, there's those who think, you know, no, Bitcoin is the best blockchain, and then others will say no, there's Ethereum is the best blockchain, and then others say no, there are many different types of blockchains that have their own use cases. And now with the seemingly, you know, growth of layer two solutions, you know, once even Ethereum has essentially said, listen, the way we're going to scale is layer two, and seemingly, even if you just throw a layer two onto Bitcoin, you know, and give it all the functionality you want, does it really even kind of matter? Is there even a layer, like a layer one race anymore? Are those over? Because as long as you're able to build any functionality you want onto any blockchain with a layer two, does it really matter the layer one blockchains anymore? Or does this mean now that essentially the layer one that has the best consensus is therefore the winner regardless of functionality?
Yeah, I think that having a debate over which layer one is best is a little bit like debating which BIOS is best, right? So the BIOS is like this. So if you think about like when computers started, the whole thing was one system. And the software was actually very often built into the hardware. And if you think about how a calculator, like from the 1970s works, is, you know, it does just one thing, and that's your system. So everyone in their computer has a BIOS, which is like, you know, the most fundamental piece of hardware operating system for the system. It's the base layer. But then on top of that, you've got other systems, and you have the operating system, and you have applications. Nobody cares anymore about what their BIOS is. Nobody even knows. Most people don't even know they have a BIOS. So I think of the base layer, and I think you make a very astute point. Chain layer one was never actually important. The only reason we have so many layer ones is because people wanted to create altcoins, because they wanted to sell people coins. And in order to have a new coin, because the Bitcoin blockchain was designed only for Bitcoin, people had to come up with a way to create a new coin, and then they had to come up with an excuse for the new coin, which was some kind of new chain with special features. But it was never the case that we needed new chains for features. It was always the case that we knew, and this is the big criticism that Bitcoin has had for example, Ethereum. It was obvious that you can't create a scalable base layer system which is rich in functionality. Just like you don't run everything off of your BIOS. So Ethereum has now reached or exceeded the limitations of what it can do on layer one, as it was obvious that it would. And so now we're starting to see bridges, we're starting to see rollups, we're starting to see sharding, and many, many other types of approaches to layer two, each one which will have, you know, a part or an aspect in the economy going forward. So where is the network effect then, if it's not in the chain? And the answer is the network effect is in the assets. And Ethereum is a fantastic example of this. If you look at what's happening on Ethereum, the primacy or the Ethereum dominance, the ETH dominance on Ethereum is falling and will continue to fall. I don't think ETH is going to go away or become completely unimportant, and I think it's going to be a valuable asset. But there are billions and billions of dollars of value in the form of Bitcoin and in the form of stable coins that are being transferred to the Ethereum network. And they have vastly deeper liquidity. Certainly Bitcoin does, but the stable coins as a representative of USD as well have vastly deeper liquidity than Ethereum as ETH as an asset. So that's where the network effect is. Bitcoin can move from one layer two to another, from one layer one to another. The entire ecosystem will and continues to use Bitcoin as its reserve asset and stablecoins as the primary bridging asset to the fiat world. That's where I believe the network effects have always been, but it will become increasingly apparent that that's where they will be over the next 10 years.
Yeah, I think you hit on a really important point there, where we're constantly seeing new coins or essentially new blockchains come out with new coins, where the coin is only there to like pay for services on that blockchain. Like they could have just as easily programmed that blockchain to have Bitcoin pay for services on that blockchain, or really anything else, or stable coin or any other payment. So a lot of times when you're seeing these coins that are trying to gain value merely because of the blockchain it's on, and doesn't really serve any other purpose, which, by the way, one can say for Bitcoin, it's just the network effect got so good enough that it won. Now it actually has value. But we are seeing, we're constantly seeing this still happen. We're seeing new blockchains be built, new coins with this exact purpose we just mentioned. Polkadot, just skyrocketed now. It's in, I think it's the fourth most value in terms of market cap. They have a great technology. It's a wonderful technology. They got sharding down. Gavin Woods, who essentially really helped build Ethereum. It was basically, hey, build ETH 2.0, but don't be bogged down or have to worry about all the assets under management of ETH 1.0. Don't worry, you can't break anything. Go build it. And Polkadot. So we're seeing that. We're seeing a lot of this of the same idea. But I really I think this is where it's culminating into the ethos that a lot of us got into the space in the first place. It all works together. Like you said, Polkadot, it's all bridges. It's all bridges in between the chains. Nowadays, if you write a dApp that isn't EVM compatible, no one cares about it. And so I think this idea of what you said, where it's all apps and dApps and even operating systems built upon this base level, this BIOS. It's all an ecosystem that plays along nicely with each other. And I think that really ties into this digital freedom that we all kind of wanted, with choices and options. And that's a very exciting future. It's a much more exciting future than just this chain versus that chain, and we'll fight it out to see who wins. Do you think that kind of this idea that it's all going to be working together is a foregone conclusion at this point, or is there still the opportunity for kind of a new player? Let's say, if you were to go back to the .com boom, you said you would looked at it. Oh, AOL and Yahoo, those are the winners. No one's going to beat them out. No one even foresaw a Facebook even popping up. Are we past that point, or will we ever be past that point of a new type of blockchain that does it all popping up and really taking control?
I think there might be a new blockchain that comes and does it all. I don't think it will matter to most users. It's sort of like, somebody, so you've got a computer and it used to run on one type of Intel chip, and now it runs on an Apple chip, or it runs on a new kind of Intel chip, right? What do you care? What's important to you are the applications or what you do with it. So do I think that there are going to be, is that new chain going to have a new asset which is going to then rise to prominence? Maybe, but I don't really see why it would. The blockchains aren't what's important. Even the Bitcoin blockchain is sort of a sacrifice. No, if you could have Bitcoin without the Bitcoin blockchain, you would. Satoshi never mentions the Bitcoin blockchain. He never even mentions the term blockchain. What he speaks about is Bitcoin. He talks about the asset, because the asset is where the network effect is. The asset is what provides you with your application. It's the thing that you use. It's the thing that the user wants. The blockchain is sort of the price you have to pay in order to get there. So as bridging technologies improve, and that also means as cryptography improves, and it becomes even easier to move assets from chain to chain, and that will include Bitcoin, the primacy of the assets as the thing that users are focused on is going to become more and more obvious. So it's true that there was AOL, and AOL at the time seemed like a really good idea. It seemed really important. Why? Because what AOL did is they had their own network, right? They would send you a CD in the mail, and you would connect, and now you were part of the AOL network, and you had AOL email, and you had AOL chat, and it seemed really important at the time. But people weren't there for the AOL. They were there for the internet. And as it became more and more seamless to get onto the internet, as the frictions, the user frictions disappeared, the importance of AOL as in reducing those user frictions disappeared as well. Right now, the user frictions are in between these different chains. Like if you want to have an asset like an ERC20 asset, you need to be on Ethereum, but already these assets are starting to migrate to other places. The wallets are going to further and further abstract away from those things. And so the chains are not important. Now, they're not entirely unimportant. It's not like Intel is unimportant, right? Intel still makes a lot of money. AMD makes a lot of money. But they're not, but so does Microsoft, and so does Google. And you have higher and higher layers of abstraction.
So you mentioned that really the assets that really do matter are the Bitcoin and the stable coins. Yes. And that's essentially, do the stable coins only matter up until the point where fiat money matters? As in stable coins, like you mentioned, is just that bridge to the fiat world. So is that really only matter, as long as we are still reliant upon the fiat world for actually, buying things and purchasing things and interacting? Or like as in, if Bitcoin starts to become accepted as an actual means of payment around the world, do stablecoins then lose their significance?
So let me try and add a little bit of nuance here. I don't think the only assets that matter are Bitcoin and stablecoins. I think the only monetary assets that matter are Bitcoin and stablecoins. I think Bitcoin is a cryptocurrency, so to speak. I think stablecoins are cryptocurrencies. I think all the other assets are not cryptocurrencies. They're called altcoins, but they're actually not coins. They're something else. So, for example, ETH is a utility token. They would call it gas, right? Some people. And the founders of Ethereum initially called it sort of gas and used the analogy of petroleum. It's the thing that you need in order to run Ethereum. Okay, so it's not an unimportant asset. It's just not a monetary asset. It's not a cryptocurrency. There are many other things, like the system Sovryn that I'm contributing to has a token called SOV. SOV is the coordination token for the Sovryn community. It is how decisions get made about how to move the project forward. It is how the revenues that the system generates are distributed among users. It's how staking is provided to allow for the trustless bridge with Bitcoin. And so it basically coordinates the efforts of the community. In a way, it's kind of like having equity, right? So you get to vote and have influence on the system, and you get to have revenues. It's a new kind of decentralized equity in some ways. These are very, very important things. I think the fact that we have alternatives now to equity, to commodities, to derivatives, and we have entirely new ways of envisioning which types of assets we're going to be creating is extremely important, and there will be trillions of dollars of value in that, or rather I should say millions of dollars, millions of Bitcoins worth of value in those different assets. So that's my thinking on the monetary side. With regards to the second part of your question, do I think stablecoins disappear? I think having payment. So if you think about Bitcoin, it's got this very important store of value component. That doesn't mean that Bitcoin itself is going to have also the transactional component. I think it will be, so on Sovryn, there's a Bitcoin-backed stable coin. This allows you to transact with Bitcoin without having to transact with Bitcoin, without having to price in Bitcoin. Bitcoin is forever going to be volatile to one degree or another because its supply cannot adjust to its demand, right? So tokens which can adjust or automatically adjust supply to demand are less volatile on a day-to-day basis and are more likely to be the type of transactional assets we use. And we will probably use Bitcoin as the store of value, which backs those, which gives them their ultimate value. And that brings us back to sort of the centralized USD fiat stablecoins. I think they're going to be extremely important, probably for another 10 years. But I do think that they are going to lose importance, not because they're not important, but because the thing that they're representing, which is fiat, which is the USD, is going to lose importance. Money is valuable to the extent that it is neutral, right? Because money is, if you have a high degree of trust in someone, you don't even need money, right? When you go to a restaurant with your family or your friends, sometimes I pay, sometimes you pay. Only some people really keep a scorecard of that, right? But if you are transacting with strangers in the form of business, these are not, now you need a neutral thing, which is money, which you can transfer amongst yourself. Dollars have become less and less neutral over time in two ways. First of all, the federal government and the central banks print them at will in order to meet their own needs and goals. This is not neutral activity. Second, the global financial surveillance system, which includes KYC, AML, sanctions, controls on SWIFT and international transactions, has made, even on a geopolitical level, USD less neutral. And as a result, we're seeing on an ongoing basis attempts to move away from the dollar. And that process is going to continue because there's no way that the political structure of the US government is going to allow it to, now that it is addicted to having this complete centralized control over the currency, it's going to allow it to revert back to the discipline of a Bitcoin standard or the discipline of a gold standard. And just to be clear, the reason those standards were important is because gold was neutral. Nobody could create new gold.
Right. I mean, and that they famously got off the gold standard, and that's what many attribute to the kind of the end of fiat as we know it. But I mean, of course, the U.S. government, you mentioned, a tremendous amount of their power comes from their control of the U.S. dollar. Ever since World War II, it's essentially been the global currency, the international currency that even international trade is done by. And a lot of people our countries are going off that because essentially, it's like playing Monopoly, and the bank keeps on cheating. The bank keeps on giving himself, whoever's the bank keeps on giving himself more money. It imbalances the whole system and is unfair to all the other players. It's great for America. America holds all the cards, not as good for everyone else. And so we're seeing this, like you mentioned, they don't want to give up that power. And we're seeing this with how they are actually regulating cryptocurrencies, latest with their FinCEN crypto proposal, where they're essentially proposing that KYC and AML will be required even going from exchange to a private wallet. What are your thoughts on that?
I think this is going to be one of the most important trends to watch over the next 10 years. I've mentioned 10 years twice, and this is probably the third time I've said it. I see the blockchain, crypto, Bitcoin project as a 30-year project. The first 10 years, we've already been through. First 10 years have been about the early adoption. It's been the honeymoon phase. People creating all kinds of new chains, all kinds of new coins. Basically, it didn't really matter what you created. You looked like a genius, because even if you invest in some kind of shitcoin, it would go up 100x. And it was still small enough that nobody really cared about it. So there was no substantial regulatory attention. There was some attention to dark markets, some attention to KYC, but nothing that didn't exist for even other art classes like wine or art. Like nothing, no special attention was paid. Now we're entering a new phase, and in this new phase, there's institutional adoption, there is mass adoption, and Bitcoin and the crypto industry as a whole is becoming a true threat, a visible threat to the status quo. A threat so obvious that even the most unimaginative bureaucrat can see it plainly. And so what we're now starting to see is, if you go through, first they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you. We're in the then they fight you phase. And that's this coming phase is going to get clearer and clearer and more dramatic over the course of the next 10 years. It will also be the phase where we increasingly decentralize not just the monetary layer, but also the financial layer on top of it. And then I think the final 10 years, which is we're about 10 years away from that phase starting, is going to be the end game, right? So now we're in the middle game. And the end game will be the conversion of not just the economic system, but also our global institutions to being based on technology which is similar to blockchain or blockchain technology. In other words, introducing the same degree of borderless, permissionless transparency across the economy and our political institutions. And that's going to be a very, very exciting phase. Right now, the middle is always the most difficult. You get very enthusiastic at the beginning and you reap the rewards at the end. The next 10 years, I think, are going to be marked with much more conflict, and that conflict is going to be external. In a way, the conflict is not going to increase, it's going to shift. So for the last 10 years, because we've been in such a honeymoon phase, we've had all of the time in the world to turn on each other, right? To shout at each other on Twitter and to argue whose coin was best and what altcoin this and what feature that. I think the crypto tribalism that we've seen is going to diminish quite quickly over the course of the next few years as it becomes apparent that we have an external foe, because nothing unites a community like having an external enemy, and our enemy is the no coiner status quo.
And that's so the fight is starting now. Everyone should go out and get their pitchforks.
No, not pitchforks. That's the beauty of Bitcoin. It's the beauty of crypto. It's the beauty of cypherpunk. You don't need a pitchfork. You protect yourself by maintaining your sovereignty, your independence through the use of cryptography. In other words, what's the beauty of cryptography is it's a simple little algorithm, and all the supercomputers in the world can't crack it. Right? So you have asymmetric power over even the most powerful government in the world. They can't crack your Bitcoin private key. So you can, as a result, be completely defended. And so what we're going to be doing is extending that logic. So we'll start using decentralized services instead of centralized services. We'll start using decentralized identity instead of centralized authoritarian identity. We'll start using decentralized institutions like DAOs instead of corporations or government. That's how we win. We don't fight, right? We refuse the fight. We make the battle impossible because of the asymmetric advantages of cryptography. And that's why the next few years, the really big story is going to be DeFi, because it's extending the logic of sovereignty, of your keys, your control to the financial activity that is associated with these assets.
And, right now we're in a bull run. So all the retail traders and everyone's mothers FOMOing in, as usually happens when price kind of goes up. And we've seen that time and time again, where the mainstream doesn't care about the technology, doesn't care about the freedom, doesn't care about the lack of monetary control. They care about price. They care, ooh, this has value, this doesn't have value. Will I be able to make money in it? And so if the US goes ahead and takes a really hard stance, and then governments around the world take hard stances because they realize that, hey, we're going to lose our control over the people. The control we have over the people is very much a large part based off this fiat currency system we currently have. And by doing so, Bitcoin and crypto loses the mainstreamers. And so it essentially reverts back to the old days, where it was just the early adopters, just the cypherpunkers, just the people who were there, for this detachment and freedom from government controls and centralized controls. Does it, like, is the dream gone at that point? As in, let's say you knock out the potential for actual mainstream adoption.
That's not how it's going to play out. And the reason it's not going to play out is several-fold. So first, people are interested in price. But that's just how you get into the rabbit hole. That's once you're falling, you get deeper and deeper. Once people discover sovereignty, once they get a little bit of taste of freedom, they want more. That's the remarkable thing about it, right? So the attempt is going to be to try and cut people off from that first taste of freedom. They're going to say, all right, you can use Coinbase, you can use Fidelity, you can use whatever, right? And buy Bitcoin, but you won't be able, or PayPal, you won't be able to withdraw your funds. And then what's going to happen is people are going to buy Bitcoin, and then they're going to discover that they can't move their Bitcoin, and that's going to rankle them. It's going to feel like an irritant, because I've got my Bitcoin in PayPal. Like, I have a Revolut account, which is kind of like a PayPal account. I got some Bitcoin on the Revolut account. I can't move it. It sucks. My Bitcoin in my wallet, I can move to wherever I want. I can do whatever I want with it. And so what happens when you try to close the gates is that people notice the gates are closing, and what is the immediate urge that every single human has when they see that the gates are closing? They want to get into the other side of the gates, right? It's only going to drive the motivation to get to the other side of the gate, to make sure you're not trapped in the permissionless world, stronger and stronger. And this is not just a crypto thing. This is happening in a background where Facebook and Twitter and social media are canceling people. They've now proven they can cancel anyone in the world. They can cancel the president of the United States. It creates a situation where government, which is supposed to be regulating businesses, we're instead in a world where the businesses are regulating government. This is going to take up a lot of attention in terms of mind share for these corporations and for government. That's where a big part of their focus is going to be. And ordinary people like you and me, who live in a world like this, what they see, what everyone sees, is these centralized behemoths fighting over control of us. And Bitcoin saying, no, we want to give you back control. Bitcoin is the way that you take back control. And so if you think about the central political issue that we're going to face over the next 20 years as a species on a global basis, it's the question of who has control over my digital life, because my digital life increasingly is my life. And the resounding response that humanity is going to give is, I want to have control over my digital life. And they're going to discover that crypto is the way that they achieve that.
And I really hope you're right, but what I've seen, so much of society has been conditioned to not look for that, but rather look for convenience. And what I mean by that, the idea that if you poll the earth right now, poll the citizens of the earth, and you tell them, here's this Bitcoin, here's this great idea, and even sell them on the Bitcoin. And then you say, great, now you have two options to hold it. either you could be in charge of the key, but don't lose this, because if you lose this, it's all gone. Or if you want, we have here a solution like a Coinbase. It's what you know. There's a username, there's a password. If you forget your password, don't worry. You just email us and we'll send you a password reset. And so right now, people are conditioned to go for that convenience. The majority of people will pick that convenience, even if in the long term, even if at the end of the day, that doesn't give them the power and that isn't what's best for them. So do you think that is actual human nature? Or do you think that's the way that they've been conditioned, and that over time, as people do start shifting to the liberty, they will be, unconditioned and actually strive for that liberty?
I think that we have an asymmetrical advantage in that our technology keeps getting more convenient to use, right? Mm-hmm. Permissionless technology, which innovates permissionlessly, becomes more and more convenient. Laws, regulations, barriers are frictions. The more you add, the less convenient it is to use those services. As exchanges have more regulations they need to follow, the exchanges, already have the friction of you have to go through all of this KYC to get on the system. Then you have to go through more KYC to withdraw from the system, right? They're going to increasingly start asking you for more and more information on all kinds of aspects. They're going to the experience there is going to deteriorate. At the end of the day, not just convenience, but also yield. The yield that exists in DeFi is far greater than the yield that exists in centralized systems. People are going to be, for the reasons of convenience, for reasons of greed, and ultimately when they get to the bottom of the rabbit hole, for reasons of their own personal freedom, going to be attracted. Everything is pointing in the right direction. Bitcoin is a social movement disguised as a get-rich-quick scheme. Crypto is a social movement and a reconstruction of our institutions disguised as a get-rich-quick scheme. And it's because it has that disguise that it is and will continue to be so successful. So I'd like to thank you very much for the time that you've given me today. Unfortunately, I have to run now because there's a revolution on, and I'm taking part. And I encourage everyone to come to sovryn.app and extend their sovereignty and their liberty, and do so in the best fashion of a get-rich-quick scheme before other people do.
Well, Edan, thank you so much. I really do appreciate you taking the time and giving your really interesting thoughts on the sphere and the future that holds for it. Listen, I'm with you. I'm in with you in the fight. I'll follow you in this battle. Let's get some freedom. Edan Yago, thank you so much for joining us, and for all of our viewers here at Reimagine 2021. I'm Yonah Hochhauser. Thanks for watching.
Thank you very much.